All right, all right. Good evening. This is two times this week that we are going live in the PM. You know how this goes. Give me a quick second to get the group all loaded in because I will never understand why Facebook decided to absolutely demolish how all of this works.
Yeah, I'm trying to
But
share it on the
yeah,
KFM page also. So
cool. Um, so you know how this goes. We are back with Pastor Reacts, where this is a bit more of a this is a bit more of a free flowing show. So, what that means for you all, our lovely watchers, is as you come in, couple of things. Go ahead and say what's up. Let us know where you're tuning in from, all of that. But also, any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that as we go through tonight's show. Um, Go ahead and drop them in the comments section. We want to hear from you, but needs to be said because this is not your typical one. This is not going to be as breezy as earlier this week when we had the joy of talking about Superman and all of this sort of stuff. We get it. Tonight's episode is about a rather controversial figure and all of that. And yes, all of that is true. We're not going to back down from that. But let's keep it cool in the comment section, okay? Like anything that you've got to say or anything else like that, ask yourself the question, is the way that I am framing this and wording this ultimately helpful, ultimately loving, and how am I displaying Christ in this moment? Because that's going to matter, and that doesn't mean don't have an opinion. That doesn't mean don't voice yourself, but how you do it really does matter, and that's going to be something that it's going to be a prevailing topic throughout tonight's episode. But figure it really does matter for the comment section this time.
yeah, yeah.
So you are going to notice that little bit of a change up. Two things are different. We usually play a game of what is Joe listening to during Pastor Reacts. Nothing because I've got a guest.
He's listening to me.
Yeah, I'm listening to his sultry tones. So we're staying true, right? We're staying true to the gimmick. The gimmick is a pastor reacting to this, that, or the other thing. So there is exactly one criteria to be a talking head on this show. You got to be a pastor. And, well, we have another one with us this evening. You know him, you love him. So, John MacArthur, I'm going to set the table for myself because this matters and how you're going to hear me kind of weaving in and out of this conversation. We've talked about this. If we've talked about it once, we've talked about it a dozen plus times. I'm not made by the system. I don't have a long history with the system. And so there are intricacies of the greater church history world that I am aware of, but I don't have war stories over in the same way that some other folks do. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what I'm going to have to offer about talking about the life and legacy and death and response to John MacArthur is going to sit at the level of how do we process this, mm-hmm. and that sort of thing, rather than getting into the nuance and minutia. All of what I just said is almost the exact opposite for Andrew. Andrew is well steeped, well versed, and well experienced in this world, and so, yeah. So kick us off where you want to kick us off. Why is this such a big deal? Like, why is there so much controversy going on? How do we handle it while still being authentic to people who are honestly grieve, like how do we wrap our minds around the fact that the death of one person is bringing about a whole group of people who are very clearly devastated
Mm-hmm.
that a central figure for them has passed away, and then also a whole other group of people who are like, we should not be remembering this man in an honoring sort of way.
So where to start? That's a fun one. Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things with even where to start as far as even to talk about who we're talking about. So most people that were aware of John MacArthur pre 2020 were theology people, or those that had his study Bible, and even those that had his study Bible may not even know who he was. So the majority of people that have come up through, Bible school and intense Bible study and everything up for the past, I don't even know how long, because I didn't look it up and don't really care to look it up, many years, owned a MacArthur study Bible. Like
that's where I first heard the name John MacArthur,
right.
was the MacArthur Study Bible.
Right. Most people that are in this world have one. That was also, I don't have the stats, but I mean, it's pretty safe to say that it was also one of those things where it was one of the most sought after, like, graduation gifts for people that were going off to college and things like that as well, was this MacArthur Study Bible. It was expensive. Right. It was huge, and it was considered within at least most Reformed and evangelical circles to be like the top tier study Bible that you could ever have. There, he ran a very decent sized church in LA. He ran a seminary there within LA, a Bible school within LA. And it wasn't until COVID hit that most people were fully aware of that, because then he came on full stage because he was the one that was in the news because of the fact that his church was fighting back against all of the church closing things and everything like that going on in 2020. That's where a lot of people suddenly, he was thrust more into the spotlight in terms of, for lack of a better term, in like a pop culture sense. It went from just the theology nerds knowing who this guy was, or the more Reformed world pastors knowing, into everybody was aware of this guy, and the majority of evangelicalism was behind him. Like, this guy knows what he's doing. This guy's fighting the good fight. He's fighting back against persecution, all this other kind of stuff. That is, for the most part, where people were familiar with him. Now, he also, in that time, was also running huge mega pastor conferences as well, called Shepherd Conference. He also was one that was, for the most part, more consistent, and I'm using that term very loosely, in terms of wanting to not promote a specific candidate from the pulpit. He wasn't consistent with it, but he was more consistent than other people within his area. There were a lot of those kind of things as well going on. The problem was that there were also things going on that people were not quite as aware of. So Misfits listeners should be familiar with most of the rest of the story. We had Meg Wise on back in season 2, I think. One of the first live streams we did was with At Nomadic Soul over on all the different channels. She and her husband left MacArthur's church. They had grown up in it. They were married in it. They were part of the worship team there. They were in the school, all this other stuff. They left due to the fact that there was spiritual abuse going on, and that there was neglect of care for a lot of the congregation in the midst of all the COVID stuff that people were celebrating that weren't a part of the church, but those in the church were like, people are dying here and nobody's talking about it. You also had it come to light from Julie Royce and the Royce report about the fact that there was decades of abuses that were being covered up, and that the teaching of the church was that you just had to endure. Um, there also have been reports of other types of spiritual abuses going on, things like that. And then you also then I'm trying to remember the other big one. And then the other big one that has come up, and we'll get to it as well, as far as why there's some mixed reactions here, is that MacArthur actually was one that still was promoting the curse of Ham as being biblical. There was a lot of racial stuff going on as well. He also became pretty well known in 2020 for telling Beth Moore to go home, was the other one. So there's a lot there. Now, the problem here now that we're at, that is kind of where we're leading here, is what do we do with all of that? Because you have a guy who was instrumental in the foundational teaching of a lot of people for decades.
I hear these stories, and I look at at a figure, right? Like this guy that has the name and the gravitas and all of that sort of stuff. And I'm taken back to um I don't know. It was on the earlier side because Edgar was still part of the show. When we were doing an episode of Buddy Walk on Ravi Zacharias,
Mm-hmm.
and he was gutted over what happened because that was a guy that he really looked up to. He was a figure for him. And it's in these moments where I'm very thankful that, like, the only guy that I even attribute to being a figure like that for me is one of the most benign men ever to have been known by theology. Like, seriously, he at worst he's gonna be your stern grandpa. Like, yeah, but he had some things that he said that I'm like, nationalism is showing, my good man. But that's the worst thing that can be said about Willard. And so
Yeah.
I want to recognize, as somebody who sits on the outside of some of this stuff, that for any of you that sit in the in between, that sit in the gray area that Andrew is talking about, where you're being authentic about the fact that, yo, this dude said some things, did some things, all of this sort of stuff, but he was also significant in maybe your understanding, your knowledge, or experience, or whatever the case may be, and you are torn or conflicted or troubled because of that duality that you sit in. I just want to tell you that I acknowledge you. I hear you. I see you. It is not, an easy place
No.
when we're trying to be authentic, and it would be low hanging fruit because some of the stuff that I know of with MacArthur, I know because of equality and those that side of things. So it would be very easy for me to step into this arena, like many others that I'm watching do this, and turn this into an hour plus long character assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Load them up. Let's just take them down, like one by one. Let's absolutely dissect this man's character and all of that. There's a problem with that, though. That's incredibly disingenuous, and frankly, really callous.
Yeah.
Towards a whole group of people who aren't sitting in black and white. I know that there are some people who see this very black and white, but I bring all of that up as the first of many times that you're going to hear me say during tonight's production, that before we all get our collective pitchforks out and and absolutely roast this dude, let's take a step back and realize there are some people in our midst who are hurting for one reason or another, because as somebody who has experienced abuse, I can tell you it's not as simple as, oh, your abuser died. Oftentimes brings about a lot of other much more complicated feelings and
Yeah.
things like that, rather than
So
it just being very surface level.
yeah. So why don't we do this? Let's start. I want to start with this part of it first before we even get into those individual reaction type stuff. Let's just. This is something that we've talked about this on Misfits. I know. I believe Buddy Walk kind of got into it at one point. I think during or no, maybe it was a Faith Explained when you were doing Imago Dei, or it was when we were on Kingdom. I know that you and I have that you were doing this at one point, but I want to talk for a second on the whole idea of the reaction side of this, because there's a lot of different reactions based off of what you know about the man, how you feel about the man, what the man did to you or had done for you, or all these different things. The responses that I'm seeing a lot of is that there is a lot of people quoting this idea of don't speak ill of the dead. There's and in essence, we should be able to agree with that, because the reality is that Christ tells us not to speak ill of anybody, regardless of if they're dead or not. But I think we need to actually take a second and define what this actually means, because the reality is that the idea of speaking ill of the dead, especially with somebody as complex a background as MacArthur has, comes down to what is our motivation here.
Yeah,
What is our
that
motivation here?
matters a lot more than what exactly is going out or coming out of our mouths about this thing.
So, this I know you and I have both said on both of our shows and on Kingdom on the Road. Both of us have some trauma-informed care backgrounds. I also specifically have a background where I'm partially certified due to the way that the state does it, but trained in domestic violence prevention and in advocacy. And there's a couple of things that happen when we deal with abuse that people don't understand. And you started touching on it. I want to go a step further, is the fact that when the abuser is gone, dead, there's mourning involved. Because the reality is that you don't typically, statistically, it's 1 in 10. Statistically, you don't have abuse happen to somebody that you don't, or it doesn't happen by somebody that you don't already care about. 90% of the time, it's from somebody that you know and that you thought you had a healthy relationship with, and that was good for you and looking out for you and everything else. That doesn't go away. It can't. It doesn't go away. There's always going to be that, even if you hate the person, even if you want nothing good for the person to happen, there's still going to be a piece that that's going to be hanging on, of the fact that, okay, this person is gone.
Yeah.
So even if you see people that have been abused, all this stuff, speaking out about, hey, why are you celebrating this guy? Look at what he did for me. They may not be speaking ill. They may be mourning the same loss that you are. It's just that you aren't seeing the full person that they saw. Speaking ill of somebody would be much more of those that are, in effect, celebrating that he's gone just because they didn't like him in general. Not because of anything he did, anything like that, just because maybe, and to his, I guess in some ways to his credit, we can get into a little bit later, as far as I would say it's not much credit, but there are some that the only reason that they hated the man was because of the fact that he was the pastor of a church. I mean, that is the reality. That's all they knew about him. They didn't know anything else.
Yes.
And so that kind of thing is much more speaking ill of the person just because you despise the person. But just because somebody is talking about abuse that has happened, or saying don't forget about the victims here, doesn't mean that you're speaking ill of them. It may mean that we are trying to we're still trying to mourn with those who mourn. We want to just make sure that we're mourning with all of those that are mourning. You know,
Right.
biblically speaking, anytime an image bearer dies, we should mourn, regardless of who the person is. All life is precious in the eyes of God. We should be modeling that. But just because the way somebody's mourning doesn't look like how you think it should, doesn't mean that the person is speaking ill, or anything. It may be that they are mourning just as much, maybe even more so than you are.
And the other side of it is we have been coached and trained for a very long time to live our lives in the court of public exposure.
Yeah.
Through social media, through sound bites, and all of that. And we need to make sure that we aren't going so far as to think that whatever we are seeing on social media is a full incomplete picture
Right.
of how somebody's feeling or what the situation is or anything else like that, nor should we feel compelled to add commentary on every single solitary thing that we see, because I would argue that likewise for people who are grieving, um maybe a social media platform is not the safest place to do that.
Yeah.
And maybe you shouldn't be doing that in the public eye. But even if somebody is, that doesn't give you license. That doesn't give you authority to speak as if you have any kind of knowledge base beyond what you see on that screen. And so that should bear an impact on, even if the theological side of this is totally jacked. Like this whole thing, just because he's such a divisive person and such a dangerous person and such an unhealthy person and all of these things. And you know what? I'll say it. He's all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a safe person. He was a very divisive person. He was a person who had a lot of takes that I do not personally see reflected in Jesus. All of that being said, though, I see people very earnestly upset about this whole thing. And so those are the bits that should be kicking in first,
Mm-hmm.
before commenting on dude. Before commenting on whether or not this dude is worthy of being remembered as this, that, or the other thing. Because I think even if you feel compelled to stand up and be vocal about the abuses and all of that sort of stuff, and I do think, I of all people think, that victims should have a voice. Even in a person's death, we should not minimize people's voices.
Right.
They sit in two different spots. Commenting on a person's death and celebrating a person's death and putting down anybody who's mourning, or telling them that they are feeling something wrong because of what they're feeling, all of that sits at a different level than weeping with those who weep. Even if you don't like the dude that they're weeping over, weeping with those that weep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the big thing, is that it is so complex with all of it, that we, the only option is to do that, is mourning with those who mourn. That is the call here. That's one of the things that when we did the episode on gun violence and tragedies and things like that, that was why we spent the first part of it. Is like, why is it that the first response when these sort of things happen is everybody jumps on and politicizes it?
Yeah.
It's like, where is the time to mourn? Where is the time to weep? And that's where, somebody had made a statement on Twitter this morning about the fact that they're like, well, maybe we should just wait a while before we try to character assassinate and mention all these past deeds and things like that. And the only thing that we have to be aware of is, again, the fact that there are going to be people mourning this for a different reason than you. And it's going to look differently. And let them mourn. Like, let them do it. Let them mourn. So if they are going to be, if you as somebody that has no knowledge of any of the bad stuff that had happened is all happy-go-lucky, and somebody comes along and says, hey, this dude was not there, look at what he did to me, the response should not be, well, I'm going to defend this dude that I'm celebrating mourning over. Let's mourn with those who mourn, mean that, okay, we can mourn this together then. I was unaware of that. He's gone. You're hurting as well. Let us mourn together. That's what community is supposed to look like, is a gathering together to heal. Heal, whether it's in celebration or it's in lament, whatever it may be. Communities are supposed to actually be able to come together and be able to heal together. If we are actually talking about this in the way of like, well, Christians should be doing these sort of things, if it's the same spirit, then we should be able to commune together. Whether it is in celebration or in lament, if it's the same spirit, we should be able to do this.
Yep. And I want to be crystal clear about something. We live in a world that wants us to think in terms of absolutes.
Yeah.
If you don't immediately pull out your pitchfork, pull out your bow and arrow, take this dude down, take down anybody, rebuke anybody who is celebrating any part of this man's life, or rebuking anybody who is going out of their way to trash this man in the court of public opinion, that one automatically means that you either support everything or support nothing.
Right.
That all of it's good or all of it's bad. That's what the world wants us to view all of this through the lens of. That's what we are always going to be pushed into doing, because siloing people into groups is automatically easier, because then you can build an entire narrative around that group of people because you've already categorized them. And by categorizing them, you get to paint them all as the same.
And that's where, so I'll give, there are 3 examples, 3 different posts that I jumped into the past couple of days. The first one was one remembering MacArthur and his legacy and all these other things. And I was about to just move past until there was one section of his post where he said something along the lines of, if you're going to bash him, then you're an indecent person. Right. And so I jumped in there. It's like, hang on a second. Why is it that somebody that is correctly reminding people about the fact that that is how this man treated them, as if they didn't matter, and that they weren't decent enough to be cared for, why is them speaking their own story and mourning in their own way make them the same thing that he called them? And that was something that they didn't get. They assumed, just like you said, they assumed that, well, I must be saying that if you're celebrating the man, then you're a problem. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that while you're celebrating the man, don't ignore those that are crying out in pain. The other post that we had was from somebody that was on the opposite side, where we had somebody that was talking about the fact that if you aren't in some ways mocking the man, then you are not sticking up for survivors. To which I pushed back there as well, as saying, well, why are we saying mocking is okay here? Christ tells us to not speak ill of anyone. So why is it that we are now trying to speak ill? Just because there are people hurting over here doesn't mean that there aren't people hurting on the other side. And then the third one was the one I already talked about today, where we had somebody that was saying, well, maybe we should just wait to talk about this until everybody's been able to mourn for a season and things like that. To which, again, I point out that there are people that are going to be mourning this for a season that are going to have to speak out about what had happened to them. Because telling them they have to sit down and be silent is the same thing that they were told in his church.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
his credit, he was like, actually, that's a good point. That makes sense.
And I want to be clear.
Go ahead.
I want to be clear about something, because I'm watching. What's up, everybody? I'm watching that audience ticker, and it's fluctuating a lot. And there's some people who are hearing some of the things that we're saying and hopping off. There are other people coming in, the whole 9 yards. And so I do want to take a second and say, yes, we're talking about John MacArthur. We're talking about the complexities that is this man, his life, his legacy, and how do we operate with something like this? Somebody who is divisive, who does have a very public display of non-Christ-like things. What do we do with all that? Now, I want to be clear about anybody who doesn't otherwise know this. And if you don't otherwise know this about one or both of us, but at least one of us, then I'm going to say you must be new. And welcome to KFM. We are both, in some ways, classically conservative. In other ways, we are what the world would consider very liberal.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't back down from the misogynistic things that he said, the racist things that he said, the frankly stupid things he said during 2020.
Mm-hmm.
All of it. So we're not trying to paint a picture like he was somebody that he wasn't. But there is a moment in all of this where we have to ask the question, okay, so I want to put myself in the shoes of somebody who is wrestling with this, who wants to jump on their platform and rally the masses to burn the man. Okay? Let's talk about that for a second. Why would somebody be most likely doing that? Because they're pissed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm not saying that the man didn't do plenty to piss people off. I'm not saying that you're invalid for being angry about anything that this man said, because a lot of it was frankly garbage theology.
Yeah.
But the quiet part out loud is that as followers of Christ, we follow the ways of Christ. We put one foot in front of the other and do the thing that we were called to do. I'm all for Let's rally behind the victims. Let's rally behind the oppressed. Let's rally behind the people who were told to sit down and shut up. I'm all for every single solitary bit of that, but it would be frankly wrong of me if I did not take the moment and say, hey, those feelings, while valid, are are given instruction
Mm-hmm.
by Jesus. And if we're going to follow Jesus, we need to put his instruction into practice.
Yeah, and that's where there's a couple of things there. One is that we talked before about the fact that we need to make sure that we are doing these sort of things in a trauma informed way.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talk about within DV prevention is we talk about the fact that the way we handle these types of things matters. Because if your response to abuse is anger and violence and abuse, all you're doing is flipping the script. We still have abuse in the relationship. The way you handle it matters, because if you are actually wanting to get out of an abusive cycle, then you cannot put yourself in the place where you now are the one with all the power and control. And that's across the board. That's every type of abuse, no matter what it is. But especially if we are talking about for believers, this takes on a whole nother level, because the entire idea of power and control is counter to the teachings of Jesus, like all the way across the board. And so that's part of why we're saying that it's a little bit complicated. Is it okay that you are angry? Absolutely. Is it okay that you want to fight back? That's a natural response. It's somewhat of a healthy response. But how are you going to do it matters. And especially, again, if we're talking about this from the standpoint of believers responding to these sort of things, what are we supposed to do? If we hold hatred in our heart, we've already committed murder, according to Jesus.
Yep.
If we do not forgive, we will not be forgiven, according to Jesus. Like these are the just the basic goalposts along the way. And so and this is why it's important for us to talk about these things in the right way. Forgiveness has nothing to do with the person that hurt us. Forgiveness is all about us. Forgiveness doesn't require. Go ahead.
I want to give some perspective on that, because for some people they think that forgiveness means forgetting.
Right.
Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness means that you're no longer consumed
Yes.
by what has happened.
It's
That's
a
why
release.
it's an individual thing.
It's a release of anger. It's a release of hatred. It's a clearing of your heart. This is what we see, when Jesus talks about it in the Sermon on the Mount, right? If you know that your brother has something against you, what are you supposed to do? Leave your gift at the altar, go make amends, and come back. Why? Not because you necessarily even did anything wrong, but because they aren't going to be able to worship well if they have something they're holding on to in their heart. It's about getting ourselves free from the oppression of sin in reality. It's the oppression of hate. It's the oppression of hurt. It's getting ourselves free of that to allow God to actually start working and healing us. It doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the anger and the hatred so that you can actually move forward.
And it's also not as simple as behavior modification.
No.
I need to do better. I need to get over it. Just get over it, right?
No. Yeah.
It when you are consumed by these things, you are a slave to those things. Those things have taken control
Yes.
over you. There is a reason why that's said in the scriptures. It's not hyperbolic.
No.
It is a posture where you are being driven by that thing. You are being controlled by that thing. And when we are instructed to drop our burdens and to pick up God's yoke because it's easy and light, it's this picture of protecting our peace in God.
Mm-hmm.
It's a picture of look
I'd
we
change
I
protecting to finding our peace in God.
yeah,
And
but
the
you can find it and let it and you can find it and drop it back down. I'm
right.
saying but the picture of protect your peace, and the reason why I constantly say to people protect your peace is because you can pick it up, you can find it, and then not know what to do with it,
Right.
not know how to safeguard it, not how to keep a hold of it, and not know how to put it in a place where it will actually be safe
Yeah.
and protected
And
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 and cared for.
and the only reason that I was saying that is because oftentimes when we're dealing with people that are coming out of abuse, coming out of trauma, coming out of oppression, the word protection takes on a whole different meaning. And
Yeah,
the idea of actually, and I agree with everything you said, but I'm saying that part of what I think the difference with where I was going with it is that if we are going to say we are going to actually find ourselves with finding peace in God,
yeah.
we're going to have that's a commitment level on my part. And so now it's going to be something more than just, okay, God's giving me peace for today, and I'm going to set it back down. Now it's the only place I'm going to find this is here. And if I find it here, then I know that I don't have to protect myself anymore because the Spirit is going to do it for me. Now, that doesn't mean I don't protect myself. It doesn't mean I don't set up boundaries. It doesn't mean I don't do this, this, and this. But I do it in a way that is now going to last rather than just, I hope this lasts. And that's where, it really that a lot of it comes down to a lot of the stuff that was somewhat ridiculous that was being said from the pulpit at his church in 2020 is this idea of faith over fear, faith over fear, faith over fear. Well, if you're going to do this, then that means that you fear this, and so you should only find your faith in God and trust in God and all this other stuff. But then on the flip side, he was telling people to protect themselves from the evils of the world and to protect themselves from all this stuff. So it was okay to fear evil when it was in the picture of the things that we were writing about. But it was not okay to protect ourselves from viruses and other things like that. It's again, what we're talking about is not easy. This is nothing that we're talking about is stuff that is easy to do. It's stuff that you have to pray through. You have to be willing to actually put the effort in and put the work into.
Yeah.
And that's why this conversation gets very, very muddy and controversial just because one person's name is in it.
Now, can I illuminate this from a different angle here for a second, if I may? Because as the resident mystic, as the resident um, spiritual guy,
Yeah.
I see a lot that people wrestle with anything that comes off as overly spiritual.
Yeah.
Immediately red flags go off and alarm bells go and the whole nine yards. Like it's a lot easier to find a reason not to listen to something that sounds ethereal,
Mm-hmm.
because for a lot of people it goes against the conception of what they've had about God, what they've heard from the pulpit about God's relational nature, and how it's not about um a stance or morality or a gender or whatever. if you are somebody who either has been or is sensitive to all of the people that this man hurt for one reason or another, take your pick, 52 different flavors. Do you really want to be the one that does that to somebody else? Because every single time you get on your platform and you say, no, you be quiet. I don't agree with you. You be quiet. You're wrong. Well, wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute, ma'am. Wait a minute. What? Explain to me,
Mm-hmm.
and do so in more substance than just saying that, oh, he's a pastor and you're not, because that's a cop out.
Yeah.
That's a cop out.
Yeah.
Explain to me how there is any measure of substantive difference between doing that and what he did.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're still silencing somebody. So let's drop the pretense of the mystical stuff. Let's drop the pretense of the spiritual stuff. Do you really want to perpetuate hurt?
Yeah.
Because you got to think about this for a second. If you don't believe if some theological standard or stance has said that, dude, these two are just wildly liberal whack jobs who have no idea what they're talking about. Trust me, before we eat breakfast, we've been called worse. It's okay.
And I'm going to point out also, I have been called that directly by members of MacArthur's church for having these stances.
Yeah.
All cards on the table.
That I just want to say, hurt people. It's the deal, right? When we are hurt, the first thing we do is go and do it to somebody else. So let's stop the cycle of abuse and stop and think for a second. And stop and listen for a second. And stop and process for a second.
Some of the best responses, in some ways, I actually think they were almost eulogies, even though that wasn't even the intent. Responses to all of this that I saw were from multiple people. I think Jamar Tisby had one. Dr. Kevin Young had one. There were a couple others. But they went along the lines of, I hope that MacArthur is finding peace at the foot of a Jesus that he said didn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, where it was very much of, yes, this guy is a believer. Yes, this guy, you know, we know where he ends up. I hope he was pleasantly surprised that he was wrong about the Jesus that he had been preaching all this time. That's a very different mindset than either, oh, the guy's wonderful or the guy needs to just burn in hell. It's very much of a, no, this, he was a believer. We know there is no doubt this man proclaimed Jesus as Lord, but the picture he painted of him was not good. It was not a good picture of Jesus that was painted. And so the hope is that now he sees the real Jesus. And I really like the one editorial comment. I just want to throw it in before I move on to the next part that I wanted to get to is, I said, and I really hope that the first person that welcomed him were all the women pastors that had died before him. Which is just such a great picture, isn't it? Because the reality is that if we, you know, and this is why we say, and this falls into everything that we've been dealing with as far as the bad theology he taught. Your eschatology affects everything. And if we really believe that where we go towards the end is one of actual peace, actual ending of oppression, actual knowledge of the truth, the reality is that if that is the first group that were to welcome him, he would have actually been joyful of the fact that they were the first ones to welcome him. And that's a very beautiful thing to think about. And that's a very beautiful picture of the gospel. But we don't get to that beautiful picture of the gospel if we ignore the stuff that he did here and the people that were hurt and telling them to stay quiet. Now, The other thing, Joe, I don't know if you want us to get into this or not. We did this on a Misfits Outdoors episode because we were asked about it. I don't know if you've ever done this on Buddy Walk or not, but we've used the word a couple of times. Should we? Do you want me to actually define what it means biblically to rebuke someone?
Oh yeah.
So typically, when you have heard this word, most people think it's about angry tirades and telling somebody off.
Right.
That's not actually what we see in Scripture as far as what rebuke is. So, in First Timothy 3, where we get really the one place where it tells us to rebuke people with Scripture, there's 3 other things. You're supposed to teach, correct, rebuke, and train in righteousness. Those 4 things all go together, though. They're not separate.
Yep.
And so the first part of this is rebuke has to be done to train people in righteousness. But there's a difference between rebuke and correction, and it needs to be laid out because it really illuminates a lot of what we've been talking about here just from behind the scenes a little bit. Correction happens on a one-to-one level, although occasionally it may happen with viewers like when Joe and I enjoy correcting the other one on air. Rebuke is different than that. Correction is about, hey, you missed a step. Hey, let's go back and fix this. And, we learn together. And it's what we do on Kingdom on the Road basically every Friday. Shout out for tomorrow. Rebuke is different. Rebuke is not one-on-one. Rebuke only can happen with an audience. And it's intentional that it can only happen with an audience because it is nothing to do with the idea of the fact that we actually think the person we are rebuking is going to make the correction. Does it happen sometimes? Yeah. Does it matter? Not for the reason why we're rebuking. Rebuke happens for the people around. Rebuke happens when we stand in defense of others. We are correcting oppression directed towards somebody. So in the case of what we read in Galatians, as far as what Paul does to Peter, says that he rebuked him to his face. What does he do it for? It's because Peter was actively harming the Gentile believers, even though Peter may or may not have even known it was happening. And so Paul rebuked him publicly because the Gentiles needed to hear that Paul was in their corner, that God cared about them enough that Paul was in their corner. And so when we are saying, well, we should rebuke these people that are saying MacArthur is this great, wonderful person, that's not at all what we're saying at all. What we are saying is that if we are going to actually speak out in those kind of comment sections, those of us that were not physically harmed or spiritually harmed by the man ourselves, but know that others were, we better be sure that the message is clear that, yes, mourn the man because an image bearer is gone. Somebody that bared the image of Christ is no longer walking the earth, and that is something to mourn. But don't forget about all these people that he hurt on his way. That's not about the person ever admitting that, oh, I should have changed, or, oh, wow, this guy was a real piece of work, and maybe I shouldn't be celebrating. We need to make sure that those that are hurting still hear the voice of God in the midst of all of this. That's what rebuke is for. That's how it's supposed to go. It is not supposed to be, well, I'll use MacArthur as an example. It's not a walking up to Beth Moore in the middle of a conference and telling her to go home. That's not rebuke. That's misogyny. That's all it is.
Yep.
Rebuke would have been for somebody else to stand up and say, no, she belongs here.
Yep.
That's the difference. And it's a massive difference because, again, we're back to what is the goal here? Are we trying to edify and build up the kingdom, or are we trying to tear other people down? Because if people are going to be harmed and torn down, it's not the gospel that's being put forward.
And we need to make sure that we understand that, because we can sit here and speak truth and all of these kinds of things, but what are we doing? Like,
right.
What, to what end? And what is the what is the end goal and achievement of what we are doing? Like that, those are questions that need to be asked when we are quote unquote speaking truth to power. Because if it's just for you to be the loudest and to put down everybody else, well, as the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, you can have the best of intentions and still be acting like a jerk the entire time.
And I would even argue that your intentions aren't the best there anyway. I mean, let's be honest. Your intentions aren't the best there anyway. Because if, and you know, this is part of where I don't know that this was ever the intent of MacArthur. I'll say I don't think it may have ever been his intent, at least starting out. But largely a lot of the problems around him is the fact that in many ways he was a cult leader, a cult symbol.
Yeah.
More than anything else. Everything had to have his name on it. Even when he died, a lot of the conversation turned into, well, who now is going to take up the baton? Who now is going to carry on the legacy? All this sort of things. That mindset is one that is largely kind of what you were describing there, as far as we need to be the loudest. We need to make sure that it's all eyes are on us and that we're the ones speaking the truth to power. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to lay it down. We're called to lay it down. We're called to be the lowest. You know, the kingdom of God belongs to the least of these, not the highest. And so if your intent is to be the loudest or anything like that, then you don't have the best intentions in mind anyway. And I'll just say it plain out. Your intentions are wrong. I mean, they are. They may work out good for you, but in order to keep yourself afloat, you're going to have to stand on somebody else. And if you're standing on somebody else, there's going to be trauma and oppression that's going to follow in your wake. And that's what we have seen over the past however many years that, you know, we had this going on out in LA.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I actually did not know before all of this that he was a megachurch pastor in LA, or that he had a seminary, which as a business person, I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
That's like putting your name on a Bible and charging people for it. Come on.
Yeah, who would do that?
You know what I mean?
Well, and that's where, you know, me being the guy that does this and everything, I'm going to go ahead and I'll throw the Bible study into this. Is that this is precisely what 1 Corinthians 1 warns against. You know, this is, and actually, this was one of the first times I remember doing a Kingdom on the Road with you, back before we were ever talking KFM or anything like that. It was the first time Ant and I ever were on together. I asked the question of everybody that was in this panel, because we had like 10 or 15 people in there. I asked the question, how many of you had ever actually heard somebody preach 1 Corinthians 1 verses 10 through 15 from the pulpit on a Sunday morning? Nobody could say they had, other than me and Ant were able to say, we have preached it from the pulpit, but we've never heard anybody else do it. Yeah. And there's a reason for that. That message specifically is one that Paul puts out that should be the end of there being ability for spiritual abuse to happen. Right. Realistically, if everybody actually followed what Paul put out in 1 Corinthians 1, these sort of conversations would not be necessary. At least from actual Bible believing, to use the word that they used out at his churches. Because Paul very clearly says, he goes on, he's like, I have heard there's division among you. Some of you say I am with Paul. Some of you say I'm with Apollos. Some of you say I'm with Jesus. And then Paul very clearly lays it out. You cannot, there's no way to twist this at all. He says, did I die for you? Was Jesus divided? Why is there division among you? I did not die for you. Jesus is the only one that died for us. Jesus is the only one that matters here.
Yep.
You know, I planted, Apollos watered, but God is the one that gets the harvest. So why is there division among us? Why is there all of this support groups coming behind one pastor or this figure or this figure or this figure? That's not the way it's supposed to be. And when we don't remind people of that fact, it's very easy for us when we start to see numbers coming in, like Mr. Businessman was just talking about, for us to forget about that fact.
Right.
And even if we don't believe that we're leading people, or we don't want that or anything like that, if we don't say it, it will not stop other people from believing that for us anyway. And that is what we have seen. You know, when Nomadic Soul was on Misfits and we talked about this church specifically and her story behind what had happened and everything like that, we got a lot of angry comments from people that were part of this church or pastors that sat under him or that attended the Shepherd's Conference and all those sort of things. That's like, you're just trying to, smear the brethren and speaking ill, and you're trying to cause division or anything like that. But the reality is, we're not trying to cause division. We're actually saying, why is there division among us? Like, why is there division among us? It's not that we're trying to promote division. We're asking, why is the division there in the first place?
Right.
And that is largely what's happening right now as well, with the way that people are reacting to all of this. Is, again, we have division, and we have division because of the fact that 1 Corinthians 1 was never talked about in the first place. He did not, if no matter where you stand on his other atrocities or other like celebratory things or anything like that, one thing that is abundantly clear that nobody can disagree on is that one thing he failed to do was establish the fact that the church was Christ's church and not the church of John MacArthur. Because if that had been established, these kind of debates would not be a thing.
Yep.
And that's where I think anybody who is, jumping to his defense and saying everybody else needs to shut up, that's causing problems and all of that sort of stuff, you got to ask the question, why are you upset about it? Why are you upset about somebody else speaking out about it? Why are you hot about it? And who's the most important figure in all of this? And you know what? Even if we don't look at the sum total of everything that he said and everything that he did as a net negative, we can still look at him and say, okay, in some ways he's a cautionary tale. Don't let the persona be the most important thing. Don't let you being the voice be the most important thing. And I as somebody who has been on the receiving end of being told that they created hurt in a church context, not to that degree or in the same way or whatever, but still relevant. I don't think anybody sets out to be somebody's horror show.
Right.
And I think but I think in a lot of ways as humans, we can lose the boat on what it is that we need to be focused on and what it is and that's why it all comes back to Christ. It doesn't just come back to do something different. It comes back to turn to God and ask him for transformation of your spirit so you can see the situation through the eyes of Christ.
And I think I think ultimately, if the too long didn't read here, is that what we are saying here is that it is a cautionary tale more than anything else. We're not out here saying that those of you that gleaned only good from him are wrong and you need to change your ways. We're not saying that those that gleaned only bad and hurt from him are wrong and need to change their ways. We're saying there should be room for everybody to mourn appropriately. But the cautionary tale for those of us, especially those of us that, I mean, this is Pastor Reacts because both of us are pastors by trade. Those of us that are in positions where we have the responsibility to shepherd and to lead, how we go about it makes a big difference. Who is at the center? Is it us or is it Christ?
Mm-hmm.
And, I was thinking about this a second ago where, the last time you and I did some kind of somebody has died episode was Tim Keller.
Mm-hmm.
First off, I want to point out the irony. I'm going to say it here because we're broadcasting to Twitter, and this is where I see it the most. And so I want to make sure I say this very, very clearly for all of those that might come across this. Those of you that are upset about people talking about the abuse of MacArthur because he just died, didn't even wait for Tim Keller to die before you claim that he was an apostate. Just going to point that out. Now, back to the other part that we need to actually talk about, though. One of the things that we pointed out when we did that episode was the fact that, Keller was in a major, huge city, just like MacArthur was. But his church was not really a mega church. He never really put his name on stuff other than the authored by. His ministry was defined by what are we doing in the community, not how many people are coming into our seminary or how many Bibles have we sold or anything like that, or how are we making a name for ourselves fighting against the evil government.
Right.
The contrast is, well, we're not, and let me make sure we're clear. We're not saying one is good and one is bad, and so everybody's wrong. And again, we're not saying that. We're saying it's a cautionary tale because it didn't have to be this way. A lot of people that we've had on Misfits and that are very respectable within theology, and especially even that are considered liberal theologians or liberation theologians or all this stuff, talked about they got brought up on the MacArthur Study Bible. They still use it occasionally because some of the stuff in there actually was very good, but when it gets lost because of the other things that we know was going on. The truth gets lost in the misogyny, in the straight up racism, in the spiritual abuse, in the lack of care for those that have been hurt in the congregation by other people.
Yeah.
By the celebrity of it all. It gets lost. And so we got to be careful not to let it get lost. Because and this is, I think, where, I had said those that had those, I think, really good eulogized posts about this whole situation we're at is that, there's no doubt that MacArthur loved Jesus. He just did not paint the right Jesus for those around him. And that is really where the cautionary part of the tale comes in, is who is it that we are saying Jesus is by our lives and our ministries? Are we saying that Jesus is the Jesus of the gospel that is there to free people from oppression? Or are we still preaching a God and a gospel of everybody else is evil, and so only us righteous ones deserve to have anything? What gospel is it that we're preaching? Because that is what ultimately is going to be talked about when we get to the end, is what gospel have we preached? That in the reality is where we're at in these discussions. You have some claiming he preached the full gospel all the time and never wavered. And then the rest of us are out here saying, it's like, wait a minute, he missed a big piece because he did not free anybody from oppression, said he caused it.
Yes.
Ultimately, that's what this discussion is about what gospel did he preach?
All right, y'all. We covered a lot over the last hour plus. Go ahead and drop any last minute comments or questions that you have in the chat before we wrap it up. The reality is, there are some people who will fight with the last thing you said, that
Mhm.
he clearly loved Jesus.
Mhm.
Did he clearly love Jesus? I'm going to go with my default answer on that one. That is above my pay grade.
Mhm.
That is me punching up as far as that goes. If the sum total of what he taught reflected the Jesus that he understood, then in many, many ways, that is not reflected in the pages of Scripture.
Right.
That being said, some of the most sobering things that Jesus says is that there will be people that are part of the kingdom of God that never truly had a relationship with him,
Mhm.
because it would seem like, by Jesus' words, having a deep and intimate relationship is different than believing on the name of Christ.
Mhm.
That those are two separate things.
Yeah.
And if we take the Bible seriously, believing on the name of Christ is point A. And we should never want for somebody, if we are Christians, we should never want for somebody to be eternally separated from God. You can take the theology of hell out
Yeah.
of it. We don't need it. We don't
No.
need it for sake of this conversation. Whatever
Right.
you think hell is, fine, cool, rock with it. That's not my, or whatever you think it isn't, cool, rock with it. That's not my point. My point here. That's a separate conversation. You don't need that part of the conversation so long as we understand that whatever that looks like, it is eternal separation from God, and we should not want that for literally
Anyone.
anyone,
Right.
because the name of the game from A to Z, from soup to nuts, is redemption. This entire thing is about redemption. That is the entire summation of the story, is redemption. So if he did not really and truly understand or know the God of the Bible or Jesus, then my honest to God hope is that in his final moments he came to understand who that is.
And that ultimately is where, coming full circle, I think that's also part of the place where we need to look at our motivation behind all of this, is that if your desire would be that he's burning in hell, how is it then that your view of him is any different than the way he viewed you?
Yep.
That's
If
it.
it if the place of oppression for you was in the way that he talked about you as an individual, or your family, or the whatever group you may be a part of, or whatever it might be, demographics, or whatever it is, if you then turn around and are celebrating because you think he's burning in hell forever, sorry to say, that's the same theology that you were upset about when it came out of his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah.
We say this all the time on, everywhere within KFM, but it's straight out of scripture. God's desires that all be saved.
Yep.
That should be our desire as well. And if that's our desire, then I think we should be able to take solace in the fact that even people like MacArthur, he had a long ministry, too long of a ministry, if we're being honest. Way too long of a ministry, if we're being perfectly honest. I would be absolutely shocked if there was not somewhere along the way where the real Jesus was there. Even if it was before he started writing, even if it was before all this other stuff, there was at some point where the real Jesus had to have been there. And even if we can't say it definitively, that should be the place that we are going to arrive at to rest our hat on. With the understanding that that means that now he gets to experience that real Jesus he knew at one point fully and celebrate in the fact that he was wrong. And that's the piece of it that I think I know we've talked about in Misfits. I don't know if we've talked about it anywhere else, but the fact that we should actually be looking forward to seeing how much of this stuff we actually got wrong.
Yeah.
About who God is and who's there and who's not there and who will be there in all these other things, no matter where you stand theologically. The excitement over what God's going to show me, how stupid I actually looked, should make me just as excited as when Joe gets to point it out on air. Probably more so.
Yep.
All right, y'all. That's it. That's all. That's a wrap. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We will be back next Tuesday with another edition of Pastor Reacts. Until then, in the meantime, if you are in need of prayer, you can jump on over to kfmbroadcasting.com/prayer. There is a short form fill. When you fill it out, it will go to the team, and the team will be praying for you. But that's it for now. We will catch you next time. Remember 2 very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved.